Well, happy Wednesday evening, folks. This is Scotty Roberts. We're going live tonight. Now, the reason we're going live is I decided not to do a show today. I was a little worn out. I didn't want to pre-record this morning, and I wasn't sure I was going to get there. And then I this evening did the show with Rocky, and I said, you know what? I think I'm just going to go over and go live tonight. And so here we are. This is unique. We're not broadcasting on air tonight. There is a replay that's broadcasting on the network tonight. And so tonight, it's just us. We're here live for at least an hour in this channel. And hopefully my phone won't go off. I'm not going to dick with it right now. And so I want to thank you all for being here. Thanks for showing up. Thanks for taking your time to be here. I've got to adjust everything else because everything is so different when I go live with the channel. There we go. Camera's adjusted. Bada boom. So how is everybody tonight? Niall. I keep saying Neil, and I know it's Niall. Niall, good to see you. Glad you stayed up for the show over there in Ireland, where it is, I believe, 3 a.m. on Thursday morning. So good to see you here. And let's just roll back a little bit. I want to say good evening to Brianna Dunlap. Nice to see you. And let's see who we got. Jay Blaze, 4201. Good to see you, Jay Blaze. Niall, I've said hello to you. Glad to have you, brother. Steve Clark, good to see you here. And let's just go down the list here. And Susie Q, good to see you, Ensign. Nice to have you here tonight. And let's see who else we got. Barry Chad, good to see you. And let's see, scrolling on, Matt Finn, good to see you, brother. I was actually, by the way, you made me think of this again. I was looking for that book, The Ghost of Nicholas Grebe, so I could read it on tonight's show, and I can't find it anywhere. So it's buried in a box, or it's somewhere since we moved. I don't know where. But I went ahead and just ordered a new copy. That'll be in here from Amazon in a few days. So we'll see where we go with that. Brad Hart, how you doing, brother? Good to see you, my good friend Brad Hart. And Darkwing Duck, good to see you. Is that who I think it is? I don't know. Scott, you hooligan, he says. Let's see who else we got in here tonight. I'm just going to roll through. We're just doing a roll call. Just a roll call. Leslie Holker, good to see you, Leslie, as always. And I'm scrolling on. Matt Finn, I saw you. I'm not set up for live calls. I hate to say that. I wish I could. All you can do is state any questions you have over in the chat room and hope to God I see it. So we can give that a try. And not set up for calling yet. Audrey, good to see you. How you doing? And Corin, good to see you, sir. Down the list. Scotty's my Santa. Thank you. Ho, 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 ho. Of course I am, Corin. Ho, 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 ho. I'd scare children doing that. And I think that's everybody so far that has at least signed in. Lewis, good to see you, Lewis Boyce. And Trisha, good to see you. Trisha G, international numerologist. Good to see you, Trisha. Long time. Pardon me. My live show comes, of course, with no cough button. So pardon me for that. So, yeah, Trisha, it's very good to see you. That's what I was saying as I was coughing. So I thought I better say that again. And it's good to have you here. And tonight, I have no agenda tonight. I have no real topic tonight that I wanted to really dig into. I just thought since I wasn't going to go with the radio show tonight and an official topic, I'd just come on live and we just chat a little bit. We'll see what comes off the top of our head. And Teresa, good to see you. Glad you're here. Lusa Fuqua. Lisa Fuqua, good to see you. And Lucky Stone, you always want me to talk in my full Irish accent when you say Lucky Stone. And I think that's as they're coming in, I'm saying hi as I can think of it, unless I get caught up in conversation. If any of you have any kind of questions of me, now is the time to do it. I wish I could bring you, I wish I had the facility to bring you on air. I don't. I'm not set up like Rocky's studio yet. So once I start going live, forever live kind of thing, then we'll be set up for that by the time I get there. So if you've got anything you want to say to me specifically, want me to see it, put it in all caps, all capital letters, so I see it over there. Sean, good to see you. Sean Stroik. Good to see you. Stroik or Stroik. I don't know exactly how you say that, but I'm assuming the CH is a hard sound. Darth, Samuel Nagayan, good to see you. And Scotty, what's your favorite brewski? Oh, I've got my favorites. Guinness is really up there, but it's not, I wouldn't call that a brewski, a beer. That's a little different. It's a little heavier. I like Guinness for drinking. I like Newcastle Brown Ale is one of my favorites. And what else do I? And then some local stuff. Local like what's one of the ones that I liked? There's some Leinenkugels I like. Used to like. I like Fat Tire, New Belgium. That's a pretty good one. So, yo, Scotty, I got done with my paper. Outstanding, Darkwing Duck. Good to hear it. It's always good to get those things out of the way. So, Durwood, good to see you, brother. And let's see. Am I wearing a kilt? I am not, Audrey. I'm not wearing my kilt. Not tonight. I could have if I'd have thought of that. I was working on graphics and artwork all the way up till I looked and said, oh, it's 9:00. I got to click on the live button. So I didn't get a chance to put on a kilt tonight. I heard something England has a new king. The old royals were booted. I saw something about a new king, but I didn't even look that up because I hadn't heard that Elizabeth died or anything like that. So I have no idea on that. If somebody wants to look that up, let us know. That'd be very interesting. I don't think they would have booted the royal family, but who knows? Weirder things have happened, eh? And so, over here we're embroiled in all of the over here, I say. Like I'm talking to only British people. Brits or Irish or Australian or whatever you might be. As you know, we're going through, and over here might be just the fact that I'm in the outer perimeters of Minneapolis, where I live. I'm way out in the country. It takes me 40 minutes to get in to Minneapolis, but we're a little affected out here, of course, by what goes on in what we call the cities out here. And so I think it's starting to calm down a bit, although I haven't heard anything about it's just sunset now, just post sunset. So I'm not quite sure what's going to happen tonight. Jim Dawson, good to see you. By the way, welcome to the show. Morgan Snow, welcome. Good to see you as well. And so as you know, and I've stated them many times, and Rocky and I talked about this today, I have a big problem with the rioters. Now, I don't have problem with protestation. I don't have problem with demonstration. That is all part of the American consciousness, if you will. We have the right to free speech. We have the right to protest. We do not have the right to harm people in the process. So when protest becomes riot, when it starts to burn people's homes, destroy their property, destroy their businesses, destroy their livelihoods, then it becomes a big illegal thing that's going on. If you want to riot, go do it in your yard. Go burn down your own house in protest. You'll still go to jail for it. It's still arson. But and you won't get any insurance money out of it. But when protesters are protesting, I'm supporting them. In this particular case, the cause, a man killed by a police officer. That happens an awful lot, by the way. And it isn't always because of shootings. And by the way, in Minneapolis alone, I believe in 2019, 53% of people that had been killed by the police were white. And I think it was a much smaller, like 37% were black. But of the black people that were killed by the police, I think it was a really high number. I'll have to look these statistics up again. I saw them go by my face earlier today, and I'm going by semi-photographic memory. But I think it was something like 76% of blacks killed were violent crimes, or of all of them together killed were violent crimes, black and white. So this idea that Black Lives Matter, that the police target black people, I think is a false front. I think it's a false narrative because statistically speaking, more whites have been killed by the police in the last several years by almost double the numbers. So, what is this protest really all about? Brad Hart asks about what I think about people quoting MLK out of context as a justification for rioting. I'll get to that in a second. So, my belief is that the protests are good. They're constitutional. They are right. Protest your cause. Constitution never guaranteed you that anybody's going to listen to you or believe your cause or join you in your cause, but they guaranteed that you have the right to protest, your rights of First Amendment speech, free speech. But when somebody else comes along and takes your cause, moves it into a riot, starts destroying people's homes, you've got a totally different thing going on. I've had more people say to me, oh, so you're not as worried and upset about a black man being killed by a police officer than you are the destruction of buildings. And I said, that is a false equivalency from the get-go. No, the burning of a building should not upset anybody more than the taking of a life. However, there's something to this. Let me build a little case here. And maybe I said it on this show. Maybe I talked about it on Rocky's show. But do you remember back in the day, if you were a cattle rustler, let's say Brad Hart in the chat room had cattle, and I stole some of his cattle, and I cooked them up and ate them, and I sold a couple of other ones. Well, if he caught me, guess what? Back in the day, he could hang me. Sometimes they hung these guys without trial. Do you know why? Because when you stole somebody's cow, somebody's cattle, and I suppose it depended on the number of cattle they had, you were stealing their livelihood. You were stealing milk. You were stealing meat. You were stealing the ability for them to breed more. And so you were creating a problem for their livelihood. You could starve a family to death by stealing their cow. And so there were harsher penalties on those things. Now, let's just bring that up into the current. It's not a perfect analogy. It's just an analogy. Bring that up into the current. When you destroy somebody's place of business where they've sunk all their hard-earned money, invested all their time, all their effort, taken out loans, all of this, they probably, most of them have insurance. But when you're a small business and somebody breaks in and steals all your inventory and burns down your building, what happens to your livelihood? Now, compare one business to the death of a man. Yeah, it's serious, but still the man's life, even probably the shop owners would say the same thing. Man's life is more important than my brick and mortar, but this has affected my life and my livelihood. Now take that and multiply it times 80. 80 businesses destroyed, looted, and burned down. Some records are reports in the news are saying up to 170 businesses down the strip in Minneapolis and around the cities have been destroyed and affected. So let me ask you, what did Brad just say about Farmville? I missed it. So I got some of these are comments that get hidden by, I don't know, we must be strung too tightly in here. So I've seen some comments where somebody says something and it's not even a cuss word in it, and it's taken out, and I've got to okay it, or our moderators have to okay it. So what you've got going on now is, should 170 businesses burned, looted, livelihoods destroyed be something that we are upset about, when at the same time there was a man who was murdered or killed by the police, by negligence, by deliberation, whatever it was, he killed that man. That's upsetting to us. So is it congruent to say, I can be upset about that and protest that, and at the same time be upset about the destruction of a whole neighborhood and people's livelihoods? And then you learn that it's outside factors that are coming in. I think they said of the 93 people that had been arrested in violations during the riots, none of them were locals. They were all from out of state. So there's people coming in and destroying the neighborhoods. And I've already mentioned, I used to live in that neighborhood. That was my neck of town. I had an apartment there once in a little old brick building. I lived 2-3 blocks west up Lake Street from the Lindale Lake district that they're talking about, where all of this took place and all these burnings up and down those streets. I was in what was called, I was labeled the Rainbow Building, old building that had been refurbished. I had an office up and a studio up in there, and it was kitty corner, from those of you who know the area, from Calhoun Square, named after Lake Calhoun, way at the end, far end of Lake Street on the west. And so Lake Street, all up and down there, I lived and I did my business and my work in the uptown to the Lynn Lake district, all along Lake Street there. And so I'm very familiar with the area. And when 170 homes or businesses are destroyed, is that something to be upset about? I don't think it needs to be compared to the death of George Floyd, the killing of George Floyd. There's no comparison. The two are separate issues. So I see them as separate issues. And now Brad brought up the question about Martin Luther King. Let me go over. I'm going to go over and find his exact quote that I posted up the other day. Now, this was the quote of Martin Luther King. Let me find it. And it's coming up here. Not very far off. Hold on. There it is. Martin Luther King said this. He said, "Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that." That was something that he said. Now, somebody had commented to me about that post, and maybe it was in somebody else's post that I saw this, but somebody had said to me, well, he also said, that, and I don't have this exact quote. If you know it, Brad, if you know what that quote is, maybe put it in the chat room. Martin Luther King also said something about desperation or something like that drives people to riot, or riot is the voice of the unheard. It was something like that. I don't know where I picked up desperation in there. And so that was being used to counter the post about Martin Luther King. And I looked into that, and that was an out of context statement that he made. It was from within a speech where he was saying he found rioting deplorable, and that rioting did not advance society, that rioting was a blight on society. Again, I can't remember his exact words. I don't have his quote up in front of me. But he said all these about rioting, but he started by saying rioting is when people feel they don't have a voice. But he disagrees with rioting because rioting devalues people. Rioting devalues society. And this is what he had to say about that. Let me go over here and if that's what you were talking about, Brad, that's exactly. As for rioters, Brad said, being out of state, that's what they said initially, but they've walked it back since the public records have contradicted that. Oh, that's good to know. See, that's all I've heard is that they're from out of state. And I don't know where they picked that up. So Let's see. What is everybody saying here? Let me back this up because I talked through most of that. Many insurance policies don't cover civil unrest. So these people have lost their insurance. Doesn't even cover what they've lost when some idiot rioter burns his business down, steals all of his goods. Now, maybe under theft, he might be able to be covered. But who knows on the burning of your business during a riot, during a time of civil unrest. A riot is the language of the unheard. There it is, Roger Rabbit. Thank you, Roger. Oh, and by the way, welcome. Didn't see you earlier. So riot is the language of the unheard, Martin Luther King Jr. said. But he goes on in that same speech to say, he said more about that, where he said it was also something he disagreed with, did not approve of, he disapproved of, and that rioting also damaged society. It damaged people. And so I don't have that up in front of me, but there it is. So let's see. I'm going to look at some of your comments. Niall, you said media will not mention that, Morgan, because that's too random and meaningless. Floyd is the pony that they want to gallop off the edge of the cliff. Exactly. What did Morgan say here? Morgan, I want to go back to the antecedent of what Niall said. Niall was just thinking about that in The Gentleman in California. Taking a look here. I'm not sure if I missed something in there. So sorry if I missed a comment and I can't find the context of that. Hey, Robin Hill. Nice to see you in here. And so, Michelle, Cannon Free. Yeah, this is live, though. We're doing live tonight. I canceled the radio show for tonight. I wasn't going to pre-record one today, and I was not feeling so well at the time I did that earlier in the day. And so, as the day went on, I said, you know what? I got time. And we rarely get to do this except on Sundays. So let's do a live show tonight. And so there you go. That's my thinking on the rioting. That's my thinking on all of this, is that you do not create a justice out of committing injustice. Now, there's fine lines in there. Some people would say, well, war is injustice. Execution is unjust, people will say. But I happen to believe that in both of those cases of war and execution, there are times where it is justly waged and times where it is justly imposed on someone. So there are some fine lines there, but injustice cannot be fought by injustice. If there is an injustice here over George Floyd, it was that he was killed by a cop who should have known better, a cop who should have had the ability to not do what he did. So the big questions that will remain now is, was George Floyd killed because he is black and the cop was white and it was a hate crime and a racist act? Or was George Floyd killed because the cop was an asshole and did something very bad, didn't use right procedures, and ended up killing the guy? Was it because he was black? Was there, as we find out a little bit more, was there more to the relationship between these two guys? Now, it said there wasn't one, but as we all know, they both worked at a nightclub. The cop off duty, George Floyd worked it as a job, as security. They said their shifts didn't overlap, but did they know each other? That's interesting because the cop worked that place for 17 years. And I don't remember how long they said Floyd worked there. But did they know each other? Was there something else going on? Did he have a beef against George? Did he, when he kept his knee on his neck, which is not procedure? I know many cops, and I have a few that I've talked to about this incident, and they say, the only time you would ever put a knee on the back of the neck is if your knee slipped off of his shoulder. You just don't do that, he said. Brad has been a cop right here in our chat room. Brad is putting the knee to someone's neck and holding it there. Is that standard procedure? Especially when the suspect or the detainee isn't struggling. We've all seen the videos now. George Floyd never struggled. He never resisted arrest. Brad says, think about how you feel when a police officer pulls out behind you in traffic. Your stomach sinks. You keep your hands in plain view. Fear of the police is baked into everyone. That is absolutely true. Every time I've been pulled over, I keep my hands at the 10 o'clock and the 2 o'clock position on the wheel. And while the cop is getting ready to walk up, I usually take out my wallet, open it up, pull out my driver's license, my registration, slap it all on the dashboard, put my hands on the wheel. I open my window. When he comes, yes, officer. He says, can I say, I'm going to take my hands off the wheel, officer, and grab my license and my registration right there. And he says, okay. And I'll hand it off to him and then put my hands back on the wheel. There are things you can do to ensure that you will get yourself yanked out of your car, thrown to the ground, possibly even shot, whether you are black, white, Chinese, Indian, polka dot, or anything in between. Come here, Rainey. No. Since I'm on live, and it's a rare treat, my wife is here.
Your wife
She's
screaming children.
My wife is going to come and say hi to everybody.
Look like? Hopefully not crazy.
You look fantastic, as usual. So,
hi.
There's my lovely wife. So, there's Rainey. And she just had the kids out playing and digging for rocks again. So, did you find any more rocks?
We found some cool agates. It was just me and Flynn, and we got some big agates.
Right on.
Yeah.
Does size matter?
Yes, it does.
She told that to Rocky today, by the way. Well, this is one of her rocks, by the way. It's been sitting on my desk for 2 days. I just haven't moved it yet. She found this stuff, and that's the one we posted and said, are those fossils in there? All of this stuff, like vegetation and stuff like that, and then ends up its chemical reactions.
The other side, I think, had a shell in it.
Oh, yeah. I'm not going to pick it up again.
Yeah, Tammy.
So we're just talking. We got people coming in today.
Yeah,
so
hi people.
Yeah, it's cool, Leslie. It's cool she takes them out and does that stuff.
Yeah.
I don't take the kids out digging for rocks. It's not one of my favorite things. But I would if I could, if they were like, like sexual favors promised and stuff like that, I'd probably go out rock picking.
If it was topless rock hunting.
Topless rock hunting. I'm on board. So.
Oh, geez.
Hey, Marie. How you doing? Niall says hello. Everybody's saying hi.
Hi.
There's Brad.
Hi,
By the
Niall.
way, folks, Brad is not only a former cop. Brad Hart, sitting in the chat room, used to be a minister. Brad married Rainey and I back in October of 2007. So Brad was our officiant. So, that almost sounded like a plague or a disease or something. Our officiant. He was the official that married us. So Brad's been a friend for a long time.
Yeah.
At least 15 years. A few years before that.
Longer than that, yeah.
Agate is a rock. Yes, Niall. And agate
Go give me
is...
some agates.
Grab a couple of agates, would you?
Can I eat all this?
No.
No, you cannot eat the rest of that chocolate frosting.
Yuck.
Go get mommy an agate.
Kids, they want the stupidest things to eat. Can I eat the rest of this chocolate frosting in the can? So, yeah, that's pretty cool about Brad. So Trisha says, no, it's not. In the military, it was least force as possible. That's right. Hey, everybody. Doing radio, so not that we aren't being a little informal tonight, but
Here's
look,
one agate. That's what Ellie
here's
found.
one agate, Niall.
That's Ellie's find.
Ellie found this one. So you see, now we can put these in a rock tumbler, and you tumble these babies for a couple of weeks, and it polishes them all up. So, that one's on the floor.
Here.
Well, now, like here's a polished agate that isn't. Is that just
It's
wet?
wet.
See, here's a wet one. It's just wet.
Wet one.
So you can see what it starts to do. So that's what Rainey
Here.
takes the kids
That's
out
what I
doing all
found
this
tonight.
stuff. You found this tonight?
Yes.
Look at this stuff, guys. See? Just out in the dirt where they're digging up a farm field over across the Bain Road over here. It's all farmland out here and forest, and they're digging it up to put in new developments, to extend the development of housing. And Rainey took the kids out there, started a few weeks ago, into all the hills of dirt, and started pulling just hundreds of these agates out. So it's pretty cool stuff.
I found this tonight. I don't know what that is.
It
Thought
looks
maybe
like
it
a
was
rock.
like what is it?
Oh, that's kind of a finial or something, but it's a rock.
A bone, a hip
Oh.
bone, a hip joint.
Oh, I don't
I don't know.
Beats me. So there you go. That's what Rainey does with those kids.
And there's this rock.
Get that
And
tumbler,
there's this
Rainey,
rock.
Teresa says.
I'm gonna get a vibratory bowl.
Sounds
Yes.
kinky.
Vibratory bowls only take a week instead of a tumbler, which can take like 4 to 8 weeks.
That's right. That's right. So, yeah, it's all cool. So that's something I didn't plan on talking about tonight, agates, and my wife finding rocks. But you know what she does? She takes the kids out, and it gets the kids excited to do stuff, especially when we had all the no contact stuff going on, the whole virus, which, by the way, y'all go, what happened? Didn't we have a big virus going on? What's with all these thousands of people getting within 6 feet of each other and riding? At least they're wearing masks, right?
Yeah.
But
No.
all of a sudden, the virus seemed to take backseat to everything. And so Rainey takes them all out and for something to do because they don't have school, no scouting. Of course, now it's summer, so they wouldn't have school right now anyway. But what did Brad say? Still remember my first signed book, Tam O'Hare, signed and scribed. Thanks for marrying me. That's right. Tam O'Hare came out the year after we were married. And so, yeah, it was pretty cool. It's still cool. And another thing Brad and I have going, 3 years ago, 3.5 years ago now, when I was in the hospital and I had my bypass open heart surgery, all of that stuff, all the crappy heart stuff, I found out about 6 months later that Brad was in the same hospital on the same hallway a few doors down from me, and I never knew it, for the same thing. He had a heart attack and had heart surgery as well. And so we didn't talk for a few months, and I was in recovery. And when we got to talking, we started saying, "Yeah, I had this surgery. Hey, so did I, and this and that." We were next door neighbors in the hospital the same week and didn't even know each other was there. So it was kind of weird. Ask Rainey if she has a statue of the goddess Isis. Twisted would like to know.
No, I don't.
We got a ton of statuettes left,
Yeah.
but I'm thinking we're going to need to be restocking somewhere along the way. But I'll tell you what we do have? We have.
Well,
I made
have a
this.
head.
I made this. We have that light is so bright that you almost can't see it. We were playing with clay with the kids several months ago now. And this, folks, is not just a faux head. This is an incense burner. You can stick the incense stick in his mouth. Maybe that could go up for sale. But not only that, look what else we have. Rainey made this. Look at this. You ready? This was her clay creation. There you go.
His hat broke off. Yeah.
That just happened.
Yep.
So this little clay, you can't see him because the light is getting too bright, but there he is. So her little clay creation guy. There you go. There you go. We don't have any ISIS statues, but we got those.
Yeah, yeah.
So hopefully gonna get things restocked here not long from now.
Soon.
From Egypt. So let's see. Yeah, that is a weird synchronicity, Michelle. Tell me about it, Brad and I. So Steve, Teresa, Scotty said it first. What did I say first? I missed it. Something up in there. Divine timing, yeah. That's right in the Gaian. Let's see. Corin says, I think there's some clever ways to avert or revert this crisis. I agree with you, Corin. You know what I think is really starting to happen? Maybe you can pitch in on this too, Rainey. I think with the coronavirus, the first thing we got, you could be really flippant and really conspiratorial and say, like the memes I've seen going around with Dr. Evil. And he says, well, the coronavirus failed. Time to release the rioters. And you think there's one thing after another that is challenging our country, challenging the way we do things. And so I begin to wonder with all of this if there is any truth to that, if there's anything going on. Well, we already suspected it with the virus, but now we're seeing it with all of this stuff. Who is behind the protesters? Have a cause. They're the Black Lives Matter. They're Black Americans, African Americans. They're talking about their rights. Some of them believe that they are unduly targeted by the police. The numbers don't show that, but some people believe that. And that's okay. They can protest that, demonstrate that, demonstrate against police brutality. Go right ahead. But when you start seeing all this stuff happening, where they're burning businesses and the rioting and all of this, which we've already talked about ad infinitum on this show, you're starting to see something very different going on. Is there somebody else behind that? I've had people say, well, you didn't listen when Colin Kaepernick took a knee, and so now they have to use more drastic measures for you to understand what the Black community is feeling. And my first response when I first saw that was, so Black people say we weren't listening to them, so they're trying to get our attention by burning down their neighbors' homes, burning down Black businesses. That's supposed to help raise my awareness for racial causes? No, it doesn't. It makes me hate the rioters for what they're doing to people. It doesn't draw me to a cause. You're not going to force me by force, by violence, by injustice to believe in what you bring to the table. You know what? You start committing crimes and injustice. It's like with the cop who they say killed the Black man because he was racist. Do they want to hear his defense? No, they want to see him arrested. They want to see him tried. Many would probably like to see him executed, but he hasn't been tried yet. We think we know exactly what happened because we watched that video over and over and over again. So same thing with the bigger issue. So this is where I have a problem. And I think that we are starting to grow aware because of coronavirus for the last several months and all the different angles we start looking at. And now this, you start to get maybe a little cynical, but I don't think cynical. I think intellectually cynical. We're starting to back away from it and say, no, there is something else going on underneath this. There is something where somebody's are trying to do something to our rights in this country. And because you do not deliver a just cause by committing an injustice. Something else is going on here. What about the big baskets of bricks that they keep finding down Pasadena Boulevard in California, all these other cities? Baskets of bricks lined up, and there hasn't even been a riot there yet. And they're waiting for. It's another story altogether. But what do you think about that whole thing of, I think we're starting to open our eyes a little bit and see that there's more going on than they're telling us.
Yeah, there's a lot more going on, and we'll never know unless you're up in that club of knowing.
That's the thing. That club of knowing, exactly.
Club of knowing, yeah. Yeah, it's crazy. There's a lot more going on.
By the way, Audrey said the Min statues make great ring holders.
Yes, they do.
Yes,
I have one that holds my rings.
Yes, she does.
I need to get more.
I want to see if there's any responses to that. Trisha says my son's cardiology appointments have been canceled. UTFN in the UK. It's absolute BS. I'm going tomorrow for my first physical in a year to see my doctor. I got to wear a mask and all of that and go to the hospital, but going to get blood drawn and actually going to go see my doctor. I had my last cardiologist appointment online, just like this, on Zoom. with my cardiologist about 2 weeks ago. So just asking questions. I'm sure they'd have had me come in if I had expressed some problems.
The over the computer was nice though, because then I could tattle a little bit on some of his naughty doings.
Yep.
Yeah, it was nice.
She sticks her head in and tells on me.
Yes.
So, Niall, you said it right. The cop had 15 complaints against him, one a fatal shooting, and his partner had 6. And he said he didn't learn that from mainstream media. No, mainstream's not going to tell you that. So, and by the way, I don't blame a cop for a fatal shooting. I can blame a bad cop. I can look at a bad cop who has 15 complaints against him and say, that's awfully fishy. I have known cops who have had to shoot people before, and they sometimes have to do it in self-defense. You got a cop out there who's making less money than somebody who works at Walmart, or maybe about the same, and they're out there putting their lives on the line. I saw, that reminds me of an old public service announcement I saw a long time ago. It showed this dark, creepy alley in the city in between the buildings, and shows a cop standing there with a flashlight with his back to you looking in. And the caption said, "You wouldn't go down this dark alley for all the money in the world," or something like that, for $1 million. And underneath it says, "A cop will do it for a lot less." And so, and that's, I respect the police. And when you think about it too, when you have bad cops, I looked it up the other day. There are nearly 700,000 on-duty police officers in the United States. 700,000 of them. That's the better part. Think in your head, the better part of 1 million. But 700,000 cops on active duty. And we have, over the last 10 years, a handful of bad cops, of things that we found to be Now, are bad cops like cockroaches? You see one, there's 1,000 others inside the doors, inside the cupboards. Maybe. But even if you had 1,000 bad cops, what's the ratio of 700,000 to 100,000 to 100,000? What if you had 100,000? What if you had 7,000? Let's do round numbers. That'd be 10% of bad cops are bad cops if you got 7,000 bad cops. So far, and Brad, maybe you can speak to this a little bit because you're on the inside of that more. But it would seem to me that the handful of cops that we have seen that are bad doesn't represent the whole by a large number. Let's see. I saw Brad said something here. Where'd that go? Where'd it go? Oh, right there. Hard to tell between a good cop and a bad cop. Same badge, same uniform, same patch. That's it. And what makes a bad cop? But I like to say, with this whole thing with George Floyd, I don't, when I'm talking about it, say a black man was killed by a white cop. That, to me, immediately puts it into a racial category. And we don't know if it was a racial crime. What we've got is a man, not an innocent man. George Floyd had a record too. He had a rap sheet. But we got a man who was killed by a man who was also in uniform representing the county and the city. So what happens when you've got a man who's killed by a cop? They always get investigated. It's a nice thing we had this on video, or we wouldn't probably even know that it happened the way it did. And so what motivated him to kill Lloyd? We don't know. Floyd? We don't know. Maybe that'll all eventually come out. What we know is a man is dead as a result of a cop doing something he shouldn't have done. Was it deliberate? Was he being an asshole? Used bad procedure? We don't know. We'll find out, hopefully. So, could a police 3 strikes, you're gone, Reagan law for officers be a cure? Brianna asks. I don't see why not. 3 strikes, you're gone. Maybe that's 2 strikes too many. I don't know. What do you think? 3 strikes and you're gone for a cop.
That's a hard one because bad people lie too. So you never know if they're
That's it.
calling and making a fake complaint, because those people are just assholes.
That's why I think when you have an official, it's got to go through the slow process of justice. They've got to find out the facts. They can't just try and execute this guy on the basis of the fact that a lot of people are really angry about it. And it started riots and all of this. I'm going to wonder what that guy feels like right now, seeing what his action has created. Matt Finn says you haven't had much rioting here in his area.
Now that you said it, it's coming.
Yeah, that's Rainey's philosophy. Oh, now that you said it, now you're in trouble.
Yep.
Lots of suburban whites trying to create an issue, but Detroiters know the long-term effects of burning their town down. Yes, they do. By the way, I used to live in Detroit. This is before I met Rainey. Back in 89 to 92, I lived in Detroit. I worked for an ad agency there. First, a print shop that also had a graphics design shop. One of our clients hired me away. I worked in advertising there. And we went down to Greektown, downtown Detroit, to get dinner, Greek Quarter. And we took a walk in the evening down to the waterfront on a Friday or Saturday night. And I remember walking by, there were all kinds of people just walking around the waterfront on the river there. And I passed a family, and it was a black woman with 3 little black kids. Now, it was starting to get dark. There were some park lights on, yeah, but I couldn't tell if they were boys or girls. Don't remember it. And they're all standing up on the benches, and she's teaching them to sing, and they're clapping. Blacks against the whites. Kill all the whites. And this was back in like 90, I think 90 or 91. And I passed by this woman, and I looked at her, and I said, that's a really fine repartee you're teaching your children. What? She said to me, and in that drawl of only inner city black folk that seemed to have in Detroit. And I just said, never mind. And I just walked on. And I didn't see any uprising there, but I thought, is that the attitude? That was the attitude 30 years ago. That's 30 years ago. So does everything smack of the Hegelian dialectic? Yes, it does, Michelle. It certainly does. And yeah, it's awful stuff. And so anyway, there you go. I want to get off the race war topic for right now, even though it's something we all have to deal with. Something that's not done yet. And it's created a lot of problems. It's caught on all around the world now. You see it over in Europe. They're now protesting for George Floyd. That man has a longer reach dead than he ever had alive. Now, by the way, I saw a video of his, and I think I posted it this morning. It was him talking on his Facebook, or it was on a YouTube channel, and he was talking about right and wrong. He was talking about the kids out there that are doing bad things. You know, you need to pray for them. You need to come to God. You need to, and you know, I don't know what this man was really like. I don't know that he was even knowingly committing a crime the day that he was arrested and killed. Said they came and got him because he had passed a fake $20 bill. Did he know he passed that? We may never know that. So anyway, there you go. I think that's Show the Truth is not about him. There you go. I'm not sure who you were talking about exactly there, Sean. About the cop or about George? It's a globalist driven agenda, says Leslie. You'd think European countries would have problems of their own to protest. Exactly. There it is. So let's take that topic now, move it over here and back there on the back burner. We'll talk about this again another day. So that's all I got on that. You want to stick around and talk about other fun stuff?
Let's talk about rocks.
We talk about rocks.
No. Yeah, no, I should go wrangle the kids. It's almost 10 o'clock here.
Okay.
And I
I hear them thumping all around upstairs.
Get them in bed. So
All right.
I'm gonna say goodnight. Nice talking with y'all.
Good night. Good night.
night.
I'll see you a little later.
Yes.
Come here. That's for the radio audience. And for me. And for you. You were craving
Thank
that,
you.
I know.
I needed it bad.
Yeah, she needed that bad, folks. So, all right. Let me take a drink. Ew, said Matt Finn.
Oh, it's gross.
Ew,
Oh,
girls.
Germs.
Big germs. Big time germs.
Here, I won't take my rock.
You take your big rock. There. She's going off with her big rock now. All right.
Have fun.
I will. See you in a little while.
Yeah.
All right. So, anybody else have anything you want to talk about? I got that out of the way. That stuff, I'm so tired of. Just like coronavirus, there's a saturation point where you're just done talking about it. And there's not much more you can say other than, yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, that too. So, take your big rock. That's what she said. That's right, Roger. I started working on a design for a new t-shirt. I want to share this with you, only because it was just a wild hair, and I drew this picture yesterday, and I inked it today. And now I've incorporated, it's online, it's sitting right in front of me on Photoshop. I just can't share it with you in this format, so I can't show it to you yet. But I thought, what is my response to all this racial stuff going on? I support the protesters, and I support the people that are looking for equality. And it had occurred to me that I had recently seen something about Black Americans, Native African Americans that fought in the American Revolutionary War. And so I did this drawing. This is the inking of it. And I scanned it. Niall, you might like this. This is up your alley, and a couple of you. Here, let me hold this up here. So I did this drawing. This guy was penciled, and I ended up getting him too close to the edge, and I just cut him off. But this is the drawing I did. And these are all individuals, and I looked up portraits of them where I could. There were a few paintings. There's a statue of this guy that even exists. And I called this stuff up to tell you who they were. And this guy is Crispus Atkins or Attucks. He was the man that was killed in the Boston Commons. This guy right here is Salem Poor. He was a guerrilla soldier in the American Revolution on the colonial side. This is Phyllis Wheatley. She was a poet who wrote during, and by the way, these people were all slaves at one time. I'm questioning Crispus Attucks. I'm not sure if he was a slave or not. But I know Wheatley was, and she wrote poetry during the American Revolution. This is just a soldier who's representative of the 1st Rhode Island Regiment, and which was mainly a black regiment. And there was the main officer, and his name escapes my mind. He was white, of course. They didn't allow blacks to be officers. And he was wounded at one of the battles, and he said his black regiment were so loyal to him and fought so fiercely that the enemy had to fight through all of these men to get to him, the commanding officer. And he said, every last one of them died, saving my life. That was this regiment right here. The 1st Rhode Island Regiment, these guys with the miters. This guy is Colonel Ty. His original name was Titus, and he changed it to Colonel Ty. And he was another one of these fighting guerrillas. And this is James Amistad. And he took the name Lafayette because he served with Lafayette. And Lafayette, of course, promoted him and wrote for him being freed after the revolution. So most of these guys fought for their freedom, and they got it. And I thought that was an important thing to know, that these people, just like who became American citizens, the colonials, they all fought for their freedom. And so I've made this into it. There's a big black portion under here, and it says Black Heroes of the American Revolution. and I've got their names on it. And I'm going to make that into a t-shirt or something. So I might do it in color. I'm still thinking about that. So that's a project. That's my own project. That's not paying me anything right now. I am working on, Audrey says, what projects am I working on? I'm working for a client on a pirate game, which is nice. And so I'm illustrating the box right now and doing all the graphics for the box. And it's a table game. And so there's going to be cards. There's going to be cutout ships that stand, and you play them around the board. I have to design the big layout board for the tabletop. So I'm working on that right now. I actually have it here. I don't know if you can see it, though. It's done in very light pencil, which is how I do these things before I start to color them in. But if you can see there, it's got two pirate ships lined up against each other. And you can see the captain on this ship, and the captain over on this ship, and they're all holding up their stuff. Now, this is going to be a color painting. This was just the sketch for approval from the client. So I'm working on that. And that goes in a big box. So graphite, yes. So those are a couple of the projects. I've got a logo I'm doing for Brad, as a matter of fact. And Brad, as long as you're here in the room, you'll see that tomorrow. And and I've got a couple of other logos. I've also got, I'm back now that I've got a big project that is off of my plate. I'm back into working on my book, The 10 Breaths of Ra. And I have my agent has been asking me about that, saying, how we doing on that? And so working on that, trying to get that done. And in between that, I'm taking on all the little logos I can take on, all the book design projects and things like that. That's my bread and butter. That's what I do. So if you are or know anybody who's looking for anything, there's a plug. Go over to my website, scottallenroberts.com. There's no scroll bar tonight because I'm going live. And you can see my work. And you might even be able to call me up and if you need a project done. So that's what I do. And it's over here at I don't know if Audrey heard my call out there, but there's my website. So it's scottallenroberts.com. Let's see. What else we got going on tonight? I was going to read The Ghost of Nicholas Grebe to you tonight after all our talking the last couple of days on kids' books, and I couldn't find it. And when I said that I used to read that to my older kids, and The Ghost of Nicholas Grebe. And it's a picture book. It's beautifully illustrated. Starts off in colonial times. And it's about an old guy that dies. And he's buried in a shallow grave because it's, January and the ground's frozen. And a dog ends up digging up one of his leg bones and carries it off a couple of years later. And that bone, the whole book is the story of this bone and where it's traveled over the years. And it eventually makes it back to the grave. But in the process, you've got the house is being haunted by the ghost of Nicholas Grebe. And I used to read to my daughters. It's not a super scary voice, but I started reading this book to them when they were little. And it says, and then so on who lived in the house, and like a wispy rag, you saw the legless or flappy leg, one leg flappy ghost of Nicholas Grebe floating in the air. And he says, forevermore I'll quest till all my bones together rest. And that's why I used to read the voice to them, and they dug it. And then he finally gets his bone back. The ghost dances a jig with his bone and gone forever. Went on to his eternal rest with his bone in place. So I could end with a little reading. We'll come up with something here, Sean. But I couldn't find that book. It's here in the house somewhere. I just could not find it. And that was the only kids book that occurred to me to read. But I've got a ton of books here I could read. Give you a little reading of something before we're done tonight. And I am overlapping a bit into Jim Johnson's show. So if you want to go over and see Jim Johnson, those of you who go listen to JVJ, Beyond Reality Radio, go on over and listen to him. You can catch this anytime in archive. This is just a shooting from the hip show at the last minute while we're not doing radio tonight. So if you feel you want to go over there, go ahead and head over to see James. Do I do the layout? Do I work to a die cut? Well, I do all the layout, Niall. I lay everything out. I design everything, and then put it all together. It's like, well, this isn't illustration work, but you've seen this before, everybody. I think this is when I published Intrepid magazine, and Intrepid magazine. So I laid all this out on the computer, and you can see all this is all my design work. And laying out a magazine isn't really spectacularly wild graphic work, but try to make it as fun and nice as possible. And so that's all the kind of work I did, that kind of stuff on the back cover. I've designed my own book covers for my publisher and all of that. So they always have me design my own stuff. They designed the Nephilim cover, and it sucked big time. And I said, let me try to design that for you. I've got a design, and I did that design, of course, with the alien eye in the background and the Hebrew text up in here in the background and all of that. So I designed that. That's super spectacular, blow their socks off design. And you can't tell in this lighting, but it's more green than it looks black. And so I design all that stuff for my own stuff. Yeah, that's what I do. Die cutting, I can design for die cutting as well. So I do my own layout and everything. Yeah. And you have which audiobook do you have? The Nephilim? I think the guy who read that did a great job. So, voice actor. So, thank you, by the way. Let's see what else we got here. Let's see if there's any other questions I may have missed. Remember, if you got a question, you want me to talk about a question, just put it in all caps, and I'll see it easier. Now, normally, if this were a radio show, we'd have been done almost 10 minutes ago. Just letting you know. So we're just carrying on. Teresa, you said this is a shirt design, the one about the Black Americans, Black Revolutionary War heroes? Yeah, that's what that is. It's going to be a shirt design. It could be something else. Just a graphic. I'm thinking of putting color to it, computer color. So we'll see how that turns out. Yep, Sean, that was pen and ink as well. So pencil to pen and ink. Let's see. Anything else here? I'm just scrolling backwards to see if I've missed anything. Let's see. Trisha says he's okay, but they were deciding on whether he needs surgery. His heart can enlarge without him knowing. He's currently furloughed on 80% pay. Oh my. Trisha, is this your significant other? I'm not sure what your situation. I haven't talked with you for so long. So if you're still here. Where has the COVID-19 gone? Asked Niall. Yeah, that's a good question, isn't it? It's taking a break for the riots. So, yeah, Sean, you're right. That's the comment you made earlier. Show the truth. It's not about him. No, it's not about George Floyd. It's really not. I do coats of arms. I can do them on shirts too. I've done a lot of coats of arms. I did one for my own son, not our technical Robert's coat of arms, but I used elements of it, and he had a tattoo done on his arm, my older son. Let's see. I ordered that Gustav Doré book. Good, Niall. I think it's a good book. I'd have ordered that too. So what did Roger say? A mug be nice too. Wraparound characters. Yeah, that would work on a mug. So it all depends. And if I can put the design up, and if somebody wants to buy that, it's there. So it doesn't cost me anything to put a design up. What do I think of C.S. Lewis? I liked C.S. Lewis's work. What was I going to say about him? I enjoyed the Narnia novels. I enjoyed the Screw Tape letters, things like that he's written. People say he was a Christian writer, which immediately in people's minds puts him in the Billy Graham writers and books. He wasn't that kind of Christian writer. Early last century. So his writing was Christian, to be sure, but you can tell by watching Narnia how it was handled. So, hey, Johan, good to see you. I haven't seen you for a while either. Good to see you here tonight. So glad to have some old folks back in the, not old by age, but old friends of the show. Good to see some of you back that I haven't seen for a while. Nice to have you here. Let's see. And yes, I do coat of arms shirts. Love C.S. Lewis quotes. Yeah, me too. So, I think what I will do is, let's do a little reading. It's something Sean asked for. If you're all okay with that, I'll do a little reading from a book. I'll read you something like I'm reading to my kids. How about that? And I've got a ton of stuff up here. These were some of the books we were actually talking about. Let's see what I got up here. We got the Gollum and the Djinn, which I read a little bit about that. We've got Beyond the Bright Sea. I could get you going on some of those, and you could pick those up for your own. We've got Wolf Hollow sitting here. What else have I got up here? Oh, Killing Monsters. That's a little different one. That's more a non-fictional book. What else we got up here? Plague of Corruption. That's that book that was written by Judy Mikovits, the one who came out a few weeks ago on coronavirus and everybody's trying to debunk her. Well, I've got Exodus. We've already read that one online. Got a comic book. Captain America. Avengers. That's sitting up there. What else we got here? All these are old Cub Scout books. And I've got, this is a good one. I told you last night, over the last couple of nights, I've been reading these. I have read some of these to my kids. John Carter of Mars by Edgar Rice Burroughs. This is fantastic stuff. Fantastic reading. So if you're all right, I'll read a little bit of this, just a little bit. Let's get you a little introduced to, if you've never read John Carter of Mars, written by Edgar Rice Burroughs. This would be a good book for you to look at. Now, there's an introduction here, and it starts with A Princess of Mars, which is book 1. And it starts with an introduction, however, that says this. Now, this is Edgar Rice Burroughs' writings. Remember, he wrote Tarzan, too. All the Tarzan, created Tarzan. So out of this book right here, this is the 5 collected books of the John Carter of Mars series. He starts this way. John Carter first traveled to Mars, propelled purely by the power of wish fulfillment. In the February 1912 issue of All Story magazine, in the first episode of the serial Under the Moon of Mars, signed Norman Bean, Edgar Rice Burroughs had actually signed his manuscript Norman Bean, in order to emphasize that he was perfectly ordinary individual, in no way crazy, but a kindly typesetter who had taken it upon himself to correct the error. Okay, now I'm going to skip this. This is the introduction to this collection of books. All right, let's move on from that. Let's move on to A Princess of Mars. Let's get into some of this story, and you'll hear what this is all about. All right, we'll read a few pages of this. How about that? It's 10:10. Say by 10:30 we ought to be done tonight. Here we go. All right, sit back, strap it on. Here we go. John Carter of Mars. And this is The Princess of Mars. To the reader of this work, in submitting Captain Carter's strange manuscripts to you in book form, I believe that a few words relative to the remarkable personality will be of interest. My first recollection of Captain Carter, is of the few months he spent in my father's home in Virginia, just prior to the opening of the Civil War. I was then a child of but 5 years, yet I well remember the tall, dark, smooth-faced, athletic man whom I called Uncle Jack. He seemed always to be laughing, and he entered into the sports of children with the same hearty good fellowship he displayed toward the pastimes in which the men and women of his own age indulged. Or he would sit for an hour at a time entertaining my old grandmother with stories of his strange, wild life in all parts of the world. We all loved him, and our slaves fairly worshipped the ground he trod. He was a splendid specimen of manhood, standing a good 2 inches over 6 feet, broad of shoulder, narrow of hip, and the carriage of a trained fighting man. His features were regular and clear-cut. His hair was black and closely cropped, while his eyes were of steel gray, reflecting a strong and loyal character, filled with fire and initiative. His manners were perfect, and his courtliness was that of a typical Southern gentleman of the highest type. His horsemanship, especially after hounds, was a marvel and a delight, even in that country of magnificent horsemen. I've often heard my father caution him against his wild recklessness, but he would only laugh and say that the tumble that killed him would be from the back of a horse yet unfoaled. And when the war broke out, he left us, nor did I see him again for some 15 or 16 years. When he returned, it was without warning, and I was much surprised to note that he had not aged apparently a moment. Nor had he changed in any other outward way. He was, when others were with him, the same genial, happy fellow we had known of old, but when he thought himself alone, I've seen him sit for hours, gazing off into space, his face set in a look of wistful longing and hopeless misery. And at night, he would sit thus looking up into the heavens, and at what I didn't know until I read his manuscript years later. He told us that he'd been prospecting and mining in Arizona part of the time since the war, and that he'd been very successful was evidenced by the unlimited amount of money with which he was supplied. As to the details of his life during these years, he was very reticent. In fact, he would not talk of them at all. He remained with us for about a year and then went to New York, where he purchased a little place on the Hudson, where I'd visit him once a year on the occasion of my trips to the New York market. My father and I, owning and operating a string of general stores throughout Virginia at the time. Captain Carter had a small but beautiful cottage attached or situated on a bluff overlooking the river, and during one of my last visits in the winter of 1885, I observed he was much occupied in writing, I presume now, upon this very manuscript. He told me at this time that if anything should happen to him, he wished me to take charge of his estate, and that he gave me a key to a compartment in the safe which stood in his study, telling me I would find his will there and some personal instructions which he had me pledge myself to carry out with absolute fidelity. After I had retired for the night, I've seen him from my window standing in the moonlight on the brink of the bluff, overlooking the Hudson, with his arms stretched out to the heavens as though in appeal. I thought at the time he was praying, although I never understood that he was in the strict sense of the term a religious man. Several months after I had returned home from my last visit, the 1st of March, 1886, I think, I received a telegram from him asking me to come to him at once. I had always been his favorite among the younger generation of Carters, and so I hastened to comply with his demand. I arrived at the little station about a mile from his grounds on the morning of March 4th of 1886, and when I asked the liveryman to drive me out to Captain Carter's, he replied that if I was a friend of the captain's, he had some very sad news for me. The captain had been found dead shortly after daylight that very morning by the watchman attached to an adjoining property. For some reason, The news didn't surprise me, but I hurried out to his place as quickly as possible so that I could take charge of the body and his affairs. I found the watchman who had discovered him, together with the local police chief and several townspeople, assembled in his little study. The watchman related the few details connected with the finding of the body, which he said had still been warm when he came upon it. It lay, he said, stretched in full length on the snow, with the arms outstretched above the head toward the edge of the bluff. And when he showed me the spot, it flashed upon me that it was the identical one where I had seen him on those other nights, with his arms raised in supplication to the skies. There were no marks of violence on the body, and with the aid of the local physician, the coroner's jury quickly reached a decision of death from heart failure. Left alone in the study, I opened the safe and withdrew the contents of the drawer in which he had told me I would find my instructions. They were in part peculiar indeed, but I have followed them to each last detail as faithfully as I was able. He directed that I remove his body to Virginia without embalming, and that he laid it in an open coffin within a tomb he previously had constructed, and which, as I later learned, was well ventilated. The instruction impressed upon me that I must personally see that this was carried out just as he directed, even in secrecy if necessary. His property was left in such a way that I was to receive the entire income for 25 years, when the principal was to become mine. His further instructions related to this manuscript, which I was to retain sealed and unread, just as I found it. For 11 years, nor was I to divulge its contents until 21 years after his death. A strange feature about the tomb, where his body still lay, is that the massive door is equipped with a single, huge, gold-plated spring lock, which can be opened only from the inside. Yours very sincerely, Edgar Rice Burroughs. And then it goes on into the body of the book. Let's see. Anybody have anything interesting to say while I was reading? John Carter of Mars. Yes. Johann Dancing Gypsy. Yes. See your comments. Who are we hanging? Who are we speaking of? Glasgowian, says Johann. And let's see. Oh, you need me to read slower? Read smaller? There you go. A day's weight lifted off a moment of imagination at the hands of Scotty Roberts. Smile, my friends. Life is good. The sun will rise on a new dawn. Yes, it will, Matt. Niall is overlapping JV Johnson at BRR. It's really relaxing, says Darth. So let's go on for just a little bit. It's now 10:19. I'm going to read for about 10 more minutes or so, and then we'll call it quits for the night. So again, folks, I'm reading from John Carter of Mars by Edgar Rice Burroughs, just because it's fun to do. All right. Chapter 1. On the Arizona Hills. I'm a very old man. How old? I don't really know. Possibly I'm 100, possibly more, but I cannot tell because I've never aged as other men, nor do I remember any childhood. So far as I can recollect, I've always been a man of about 30. I appear today as I did 40 years and more ago, and yet I feel that I cannot go on living forever. That same day, I shall die the real death, from which there is no resurrection. I do not know why I should fear death. I who have died twice and am still alive, but yet I have the same horror of it as you who have never died. And it's only because of this terror of death, I believe, that I am so convinced of my mortality. And because of this conviction, I have determined to write down... Hang on, folks. I have got to put on my cheaters and see if this helps me as I read. Oh, I need new glasses is the problem. I got these for drawing, so I can see up close. See if this helps me a little bit. They're so small. The type in this book is small enough that I have a little trouble with it. So let's see. He goes on here, and he says, and because of this conviction, I've determined to write down the story of of the interesting periods of my life and my death. I cannot explain the phenomena. I can only set it down here in the words of an ordinary soldier of fortune, a chronicle of the strange events that befell me during the 10 years that my dead body lay undiscovered in an Arizona cave. I've never told this story, nor shall mortal man see this manuscript until after I've passed over for eternity. I know that the average human mind will not believe what it cannot grasp. And so I do not purpose being pilloried by the public, the pulpit and the press, and held up as a colossal liar when I am but telling the simple truths which some day science will substantiate. Possibly the suggestions which I gained upon Mars, and the knowledge which I can set down in this chronicle, will aid in an earlier understanding of the mysteries of our sister planet, mysteries to you, but no longer mysteries to me. My name is John Carter. I'm better known as Captain Jack Carter of Virginia. At the close of the Civil War, I found myself possessed of several $100,000 Confederate and a captain's commission in the cavalry arm of an army which no longer existed. The servant of a state which had vanished with the hopes of the South. Motherless, penniless, and with my own means of livelihood, fighting, gone. I determined to work my way to the southwest and attempt to retrieve my fallen fortunes in a search for gold. I spent nearly a year prospecting in company with another Confederate officer, Captain James K. Powell of Richmond. We were extremely fortunate, for late in the winter of 1865, after many hardships and privations, we located the most remarkable gold-bearing quartz vein, with our wildest dreams had ever pictured. Powell, who was a mining engineer by education, stated that we had uncovered over $1 million worth of ore in a trifle over 3 months. As our equipment was crude in the extreme, we decided that one of us must return to civilization, purchase the necessary machinery, and return with a sufficient force of men properly to work the mine. As Powell was familiar with the country, as well as with the mechanical requirements of mining, we determined that it would be best for him to make the trip. It was agreed that I was to hold down our claim against the remote possibility of its being jumped by some wandering prospector. On March 3rd of 1866, Powell and I packed his provisions on 2 of our burros, and bidding me goodbye, he mounted his horse and started down the mountainside toward the valley, across which led the first stage of his journey. The morning of Powell's departure was, like nearly all Arizona mornings, clear and beautiful. I could see him and his little pack of animals picking their way down the mountainside toward the valley, and all during the morning I could catch occasional glimpses of them as they topped along back or came out upon a level plateau. My last sight of Powell was about 3 in the afternoon as he entered the shadows of the range on the opposite side of the valley. Some half hour later, I happened to glance casually across the valley and was much surprised to note those little dots in about the same place I had last seen my friend and his 2 pack animals. I'm not given to needless worrying, but the more I tried to convince myself that all was well with Powell, and that the dots I had seen on his trail were antelope or wild horses, the less I was able to assure myself. Since we had entered the territory, we had not seen a hostile Indian, and we had therefore become careless in the extreme, and we were wont to ridicule the stories we had heard of the great numbers of those vicious marauders that were supposed to haunt the trails, taking their toll in lives and torture of every white party which fell into their merciless clutches. Powell, I knew, was well armed and further an experienced Indian fighter, but I too had lived long and fought for years among the Sioux in the north, and I knew that his chances were small against a party of cunning, trailing Apaches. Finally, I could endure the suspense no longer, and arming myself with my own 2 Colt revolvers and a carbine, I strapped 2 belts of cartridges about me and, catching my saddle horse, started down the trail taken by Powell in the morning. As soon as I reached comparatively level ground, I urged my mount into a canter and continued this, where the going permitted, until close upon dusk I discovered the point where the other tracks joined those of Powell's. They were the tracks of unshoed ponies, 3 of them, and the ponies had been galloping. I followed rapidly until darkness shutting down. Until darkness shutting down, I was forced to await the rising of the moon, and given an opportunity to speculate on the question of the wisdom of my chase. Possibly I had conjured up impossible dangers, like some nervous old housewife, and when I could catch up with Powell, would get a good laugh for my pains. However, I'm not prone to sensitiveness, and the following of a sense of duty, wherever it may lead, has always been a kind of fetish with me throughout my life, which may account for the honors bestowed upon me by 3 republics and the decorations of the friendships of an old and powerful emperor and several lesser kings, in whose service my sword has been red many a time. About 9 o'clock the moon was sufficiently bright for me to proceed on my way, and I had no difficulty following the trail at a fast walk, and in some places at a brisk trot, until about midnight I reached the water hole where Powell had been expected to camp. I came upon the spot unexpectedly, finding it entirely deserted, with no signs of having been recently occupied as a camp. I was interested to note that the tracks of the pursuing horsemen, for such as I knew now, convinced they must be, continued after Powell with only a brief stop at the hole for water, and always at the same rate of speed as his. I was positive now that the trailers were Apache, and that they wished to capture Powell alive for the fiendish pleasure of the torture. So I urged my horse onward at a most dangerous pace, hoping against hope that I would catch up with the red rascals before they attacked him. You can tell what century this was written in. Further speculation was suddenly cut short by the faint report of 2 shots far ahead of me. I knew that Powell would need me now if ever, and I instantly urged my horse to his topmost speed up the narrow and difficult mountain trail. I had forged ahead for perhaps a mile or more without hearing further sounds, when the trail suddenly debouched into small open plateau near the summit of the pass. I had passed through a narrow overhanging gorge just before entering suddenly upon this table land, and the sight which met my eyes filled me with consternation and dismay. The little stretch of level land was white with Indian teepees, and there were probably 1,000 red warriors clustered around some object near the center of the camp. Their attention was so wholly riveted to this point of interest that they did not notice me, and I easily could have turned back into the dark recesses of the gorge and make my escape with perfect safety. The fact, however, that this thought did not occur to me until the following day removes any possible right to a claim to heroism to which the narrative of this episode might possibly otherwise entitle me. I do not believe that I am made of the stuff which constitutes heroes, because in all of the hundreds of instances that my voluntary acts have placed me face to face with death, I cannot recall a single one where any alternative step to that I took occurred to me until many hours later. My mind is evidently so constituted that I am subconsciously forced into the path of duty without recourse to tiresome mental processes. However that may be, I have never regretted that cowardice is not optional with me. In this instance, I was, of course, positive that Powell was the center of attraction. But whether I thought or acted first, I do not know. But within an instant from the moment that scene broke open on my view, I had whipped out my revolvers and was charging down upon the entire army of warriors, shooting rapidly and whooping at the top of my lungs. Single-handed, I could not have pursued better tactics, for the red men, convinced by sudden surprise that not less than a regiment of regulars was upon them, turned and fled in every direction for their bows, arrows, and rifles. The view which their hurried routing disclosed filled me with apprehension and with rage. Under the clear rays of the Arizona moon lay Powell, his body fairly bristling with the hostile arrows of the braves. That he was already dead, I could not but be convinced, and yet I would have saved his body from the mutilation at the hands of the Apaches as quickly as I would have saved the man himself from death. Riding close to him, I reached down from the saddle and, grasping his cartridge belt, drew him up across the withers of my mount. A backward glance convinced me that to return by the way I had come would be more hazardous than to continue across the plateau. So, putting spurs to my poor beast, I made a dash for the opening to the pass, which I could distinguish on the far right side of the tableland. The Indians had by this time discovered that I was alone, and I was pursued with imprecations, arrows, and rifle balls. The fact that it's difficult to aim anything but imprecations accurately by moonlight meant they were upset with the sudden and unexpected manner of my advent, and that I was a rather rapidly moving target, saved me from the various deadly projectiles of the enemy and permitted me to reach the shadows of the surrounding peaks before an orderly pursuit could be organized. My horse was traveling practically unguided, as I knew that I had probably less knowledge of the exact location of the trail to the pass than he. And thus it happened that he entered a defile which led to the summit of the range and not to the pass which I had hoped would carry me to the valley and to safety. It's probable, however, that to this fact I owe my life, and the remarkable experiences and adventures which befell me during the following 10 years. We got a page and a half left. I think I'll finish it, even though I've gone 4 minutes longer than I said I would. Stick around if you want to. Let's finish this last page and a half of this chapter, just for fun. My first knowledge that I was on the wrong trail came when I heard the yells of the pursuing savages suddenly growing fainter and fainter far off to my left. I knew then that they had passed to the left of the jagged rock formation at the edge of the plateau, to the right of which my horse had borne me and the body of Powell. I drew rein on a little level promontory overlooking the trail below and to my left, and saw the party of pursuing savages disappearing around the point of a neighboring peak. I knew the Indians would soon discover they were on the wrong trail, and that the search for me would be renewed in the right direction as soon as they located my tracks. I had gone but a short distance further when what seemed to be an excellent trail opened up around the face of a high cliff. The trail was level and quiet and quite broad, and led upward and in the general direction I wished to go. The cliff also rose for several hundred feet above my right, and on my left was an equal and nearly perpendicular drop to the bottom of a rocky ravine. I had followed this trail for perhaps 100 yards when a sharp turn to the right brought me to the mouth of a large cave. The opening was about 4 feet in height and 3 to 4 feet wide, and at this opening the trail ended. It was now morning, and with the customary lack of dawn, which is startling characteristics of Arizona, it had become daylight almost without warning. Dismounting, I laid Powell upon the ground, but the most painstaking examination failed to reveal the faintest spark of life. I forced water from my canteen between his dead lips, bathed his face, and rubbed his hands, working him over continuously for the better part of an hour in the face of the fact that I knew him to be dead. I was very fond of Powell. He was he was thoroughly a man in every respect, a polished Southern gentleman, a staunch and true friend, and it was with a feeling of the deepest grief that I finally gave up my crude endeavors at resuscitation. Leaving Powell's body where it lay on the ledge, I crept into the cave to reconnoiter. I found a large chamber, possibly 100 feet in diameter and 30 or 40 feet in height. A smooth and well-worn floor, and many other evidences that the cave had at some remote period been inhabited. The back of the cave was lost in dense shadows that I could not distinguish whether there were openings into other apartments or not. As I was continuing my examination, I commenced to feel a pleasant drowsiness creeping over me, which I attributed to the fatigue of my long and strenuous ride and the reaction from the excitement of the fight and the pursuit. I felt completely or comparatively safe in my present location, as I knew that one man could defend the trail to the cave against an army. I soon became so drowsy that I could scarcely resist the strong desire to throw myself on the floor of the cave for a few moments' rest. But I knew that this would never do, as it would mean certain death at the hands of my red friends, who might be upon me at any moment. With an effort, I started toward the opening of the cave, only to reel back drunkenly against a side wall, and from there slip prone upon the floor. So there you go. There is the first chapter of John Carter of Mars. And of course, it goes on from there to chapter 2 and opens up into a whole very interesting story that you may or may not know already. So I hope you enjoyed that. There was a little reading for the night to wrap up the evening. And Rainey has made her way into the room. And she's in her pajamas, so she's not going to come over and say goodnight to you all. Just yell at Rainey.
Good night, everybody.
There you go. I'm glad you enjoyed it, folks. I'm going to call it a night. It's 10:39. It is 40 minutes after our usual end time together. Tomorrow night, I should be back with a regular show and a regular Intrepid radio program. And so thanks for sticking around. Thanks for being here. I appreciate the fact that you guys are here, that you sit through all of this, and that you enjoyed just a little off-the-wall reading for you tonight. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Teresa. Thank you, Matt, Audrey, Leslie, Sean, Darth, Teresa, Michelle, Barry, Sean and Sean S. and Sean B. and Elisa, Leslie. I think I said Leslie twice. And Steph, good to see you. So everybody, thank you for being here. I'm sure I didn't hit everybody there in the good night, but I appreciate your coming on. Thanks for your grace, your latitude, and letting me not do a radio show, but come on live tonight. And we'll be back to normal, I think, tomorrow. So with that, I'm going to give you a hearty good night and a fond farewell and say have a good rest of your night, and I'll see you tomorrow. Good night.